Lakes area of New York State, graduated from Mount Holyoke College with a degree in art history and worked in the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. And she also participated in archaeological excavations in Cyprus and Turkey. Leaving Massachusetts, she migrated to Ashland, Missouri, and began working with the State Historic Preservation in Jeff City. Since her retirement as director of that office, she's been enjoying life in Hermann and the opportunity to do research for local history. So today's program will present a glimpse into the past.
Thank you, Jerry. Can you hear me, Ben? Okay. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate the support of the Gasconade County Historical Society to let me do this program on one of my favorite topics. I appreciate the fact that so many of you turned out today on the most beautiful possible February 22nd day to hear someone drone on about Missouri history, so thank you for being here. I would also like to give a shout out to Cindy Brown. Cindy is ordinarily CEO of the Deutsheim State Historic Site. Today she is at the helm of the projector. Cindy has really been a great help in as far as constructive criticism and so forth, and putting together this talk. And she also has helped me leap from the 20th century into the 21st by doing most of the graphics for this presentation, which I greatly appreciate. And last but not least, I would like to thank the Dearborn Educational Foundation for providing funding for much of my research over the past couple of years. All right, let's begin. My real love is architectural history, and that's been my career. Once I began researching Hermann's history, I pretty much fell in love with some of the characters that populated the town. I really have never really liked people as much as buildings, so this is something new. Now, if you'll bear with me, I know there are some new faces as well as old faces, people who know well more about Hermann than do I, but I'm going to start with a platform so that we can all start at the same point, how Hermann came to be. And if you don't feel you need to know this, talk amongst yourselves. As you probably know, Hermann came about because of a group of Germans in Philadelphia. They were concerned that they were being assimilated into American life. They were losing their language, losing the sense that they were part of a German entity. There had been efforts before this group to establish colonies, always the idea of a utopian settlement that would free you of all cares and offer opportunity and perhaps income. But the group in Philadelphia really was just concerned with not being swallowed up by America. They wanted to be part of America, but not relegated to the back seat, essentially. In 1836, they founded the German Settlement Society of Philadelphia, and they set it up as a shareholder company, and those who wanted to join could buy a share or more, and with a share you could get a lot in Hermann, or if you didn't have the money for a lot, you could provide work and pay off the lot. It was very successful right off the bat, and they started out at $25 a share. Soon they went up to $35 and then $50 because it was a very popular undertaking. The society sent out scouts to look at possible locations in what they called the Far West. This was before we really had the West. It was still early in America's history. 3 deputies went out and came back with recommendations for a location for the colony. That location preferred location was Missouri, a particular location along the Missouri River. The society was so excited. This is it. We're going to do it. And they sent a young school teacher out to buy the land that the deputies had located. And that was George Beyer. He went out, he bought land, went back to Philadelphia. As it may happen, he didn't buy the land that the deputies had recommended. For whatever reason, he bought other land. And still the society said, oh, this is great, and they hired him as their general agent. And said, you'll go out to Hermann, you'll do this, you'll do that, you'll find a mill, you'll survey the town, you'll, take care of putting this town into shape. This poor little school teacher. And as you may imagine, it didn't go too well. A group wanting to get in on the ground floor, apparently, started out in 1837. 17 settlers came along. George Beyer was taken ill, and he had to stay over in Pittsburgh. Meanwhile, the rest of the settlers foraged on toward the Hermann location. This is in December of 1837, not the most auspicious time to start a colony. They arrived and they left Philadelphia. Philadelphia, the second largest city in the United States, which had plenty of infrastructure. They landed here, no infrastructure, essentially nothing. It's hard to imagine if there was even a landing. And I can imagine ladies in their traveling dress stepping into the big muddy and just being really, disillusioned with this operation. But they made it. Somehow they made it. However, George Beyer was not at the top of their list. They were very unhappy with him. He left them to come on their own. He wasn't there to survey the lots, to do what he was supposed to do. So that was the beginning of some resentment. So, leading to Beyer's premature death in 1839 because he was hated by many of the settlers. So if you were looking back at this from another time, you think, how could this possibly have succeeded? There were so many obstacles. Let's go to the next slide, Cindy. For one thing, the society developed a grid plan for the community that didn't really fit on a landscape that was so hilly. In fact, Jacob Naumann, in his letters, My Journey to America, said, this is just, what were these people thinking? This was stupid. Why did the land was rocky, it was, not suited for agriculture. Why did they do it? And, well, there you are. They did it. And if you live in Hermann, you know that many of those streets today do not go all the way through because they were in areas unsuitable for terrain, passage. What word am I searching for? So that's essentially the start of the community. You would think it would have succeeded. There were other German colony attempts that did fail, such as the Giesner Society that was formed in Germany with Friedrich Wunsch and Paul Fellinius. It didn't make it. The Rapp colony failed. So it's amazing that with all their obstacles, somehow Hermann not only made it, but succeeded quite well. Let's go to the next slide. As I was beginning my research, I was so taken by how difficult it was for the first settlers. It was not easy. The folks didn't, roll in on a bar with their lederhosen and glasses of wine and establish a flag here. The times were really, really hard. There were failures, successes, disease, suicides. At one point I thought, oh, not another suicide. You know, I didn't imagine it to be so difficult. Now, at this point, I'd like to thank the Gasconade County Historical Society archives. I couldn't have gotten to this point without their help. And they are terrific people. They are excited about history and research and very supportive. And if you haven't been there, you need to go there and find out what it's all about, or donate some money, get a break, something. It's a wonderful asset for Hermann. So, okay. I delved into probate files, newspapers, etc. My work has been with primary sources. I have a basic pet peeve about people just getting their information from secondary sources or folklore. So what I've found, to the best of my ability, is accurate information. And it tells how hard it was. This is an 1870 scene, but you can see that's the Hermann Society building, the theater and artistic center. Right now it's part of Frank Van Camp's Harbor House. Next to it, a long white building. This is 2nd Street. And I believe this might be Clark and Alice Calhoun and Clark Ganser's building on the front. You can see what appear to be grapevines in the backyard. Most of the German homes had trees and fruit trees and vines and so forth. Anyway, I think that's enough on that slide. I started out doing some research on brewing, the brewing industry in Hermann. Elsa always laughed at me that I was researching beer when this was a wine community. But there was a sizable effort at brewing beer. And one of the first characters I found was J.C. Bear. He was noted in the 1850 census as a brewer, so I started looking after him, and I just really couldn't find anything. And I finally went to the deed records and found that he had acquired first lot 6 on East 2nd, and then lot 4. It's approximately here, down from what used to be the Klinger Inn here, the Angels in the Attic building. There are newer buildings there now, but you can see the rock work. Anyway, I couldn't find anything about JC, so I went to the Volksblatt, the second German language newspaper, and I found, next please, I found ads for an operation called the Louisenberg. And I knew these were connected with, I don't know if you can see this, these ads were placed by J.C. Bear. And so I thought, oh, great, he was doing something, but what? And these were ads for balls. They had a Fastnachts ball or Mardi Gras ball, the Sylvester ball, which was the feast day of Pope Sylvester I, which occurred on the 31st of December. So that was essentially their New Year's Day ball. They did mask balls. On 2nd Street as well was the music hall, just down from the Erholung that we saw earlier, which was established by August and Constance Rieck. And you can see here, both the music hall and Louisenberg were advertising Sylvester balls. So the Germans worked hard, really, really hard, but they had a little bit of pleasure. But this wasn't every weekend. There were special events, 4th of July, Saints Ball, the Pentecost Ball, 4th of July. Anyway, so now I know that he had a facility. I went back to the deed records, and found that on lot 6, he had paid about $200 in the early part of his tenure there, and by 1859-60, he was paying $1,500, which shows that he had a property of substantial value on lots 4 and 6 on East 2nd. So I like to think of East 2nd as sort of the midtown of Hermann in those times. You could go to the Ergolan or the Music Hall or the Louisenberg and have some good times. Enjoy the Glücklichkeit that the settlers were after. Let's move to the next one soon. And then the probate file. I just love researching probate. It tells you so much. It's a little voyeuristic, but it's certainly better than reality TV. This is real stuff. The probate essentially followed through the house. There was a brewery and a bar room, a parlor, and a hall. My favorite part is the parlor. The parlor had a piano. A sofa, fancy things, cushioned chairs. And I don't know if you noticed on the earlier slide, gentlemen paid 50 cents, 25 or 50 cents, and ladies free. So I can see the ladies really enjoyed this part of the facility. In the brewery, he had 14 casks, 6 barrels, 3 half barrels, and 24 beer kegs. Those all sold for $575 at the probate sale. Now you're probably wondering about this fancy candlestick. This was girandole. They misspelled it here, but essentially it's a candelabra with several branches and glass prisms, crystal prisms hanging off it. So you can see what a lovely atmosphere might have prevailed at such a place in Hermann. And now it's gone. And we know nothing about J.C. Bear. Now I mentioned this is J.C. and Margaretha. Do we have more about Margaretha, or do we need to go back? Margaretha, his wife, I think they were a real partnership. She would have been there to help with the ladies and so forth. He would have threw the beer. And after his death in 1866, she later in 1866 holds a special ball with music from the Rhineland Music Band and wine and so forth. She carried on until she died in 1874, and later it became known as Bears Hall. So that's just a little fascinating part of early Hermann. Another of my characters, I've always been interested in Johannes Blust because he lived on East Hill near where I live, and he was a neighbor of the man who built my house, Carl Schrader. I was in the archives one day, and someone brought in this document. It was we really did an immigration document, but it's for Johannes Blust. I was so excited because I'd never seen one before. This is what he would have needed to gain passage from Deislingen, Germany, through Blackwell to Stuttgart, from Stuttgart to Strasbourg, France. France? And from there to departure to America. And I remember having a conversation with Ilsa about this. It said there's a little portion that says something about Baltimore. We couldn't decide if the ship was named Baltimore or if he was really going to Baltimore. But in 1833, he left Germany with a wife and a 3-year-old child. He was a carpenter, as shown in the 1850 census. His house does not exist as it once did. This is a picture of the interior that Cindy took. It's a braced frame dwelling with brick infill. It's very early brick, as I remember. I think I walked down there and grabbed it. It was like really large mud brick. That would have been built in the late 1830s, and it had been horribly altered. It became part of Jim Dearberg's cottage area up there, which is good. It just doesn't look like it used to, because it never looked like it used to. It had been really transmogrified. Can anyone tell me what this is? Okay, that's close enough. That's known as the Himmelstrasse. That's what used to be the Blues House. It's now a B&B, and it's called the Himmelstrasse, or Stairway to Heaven. I think that was before Led Zeppelin. But according to a story, now this is the one item I'm presenting that I don't have original documentation for, but I think it makes sense. The story is that Johannes Blues and his neighbor John Mischie built the Himmelstrasse with funds from the city, and it cost $5. And that's about 5 days' work, because the daily wage was about $1 for just about anything back then. Oh, this is my first really sad finding. John Blues, according to his family, left his house one day feeling oppressed and needing air, and his son Julius put an ad in the Advertiser Courier asking for information. And then sometime later, a body was found in the Missouri and identified as Johannes Blues. It was an apparent suicide. He tied a large 30-pound rock around his waist. Apparently just walked into the river. So, as I said, it wasn't easy. Now, let me back up a bit. Johannes had many children. He had several that died early. That was really not popular. That was really normal, because there were so many diseases. He was a carpenter. He worked on and off for the city. Then he tried growing grapes, and in the 1860 agricultural census, he produced 700 gallons of wine. So he was, he was doing things. It would seem to be a successful existence, but apparently something wasn't quite right. Okay, I'm delighted to have the photographs in the audience, because the next characters are Johann and Amalie Setzer. I really don't have a lot of information on Setzer. He wasn't picked up by the 1840 census, yet or maybe it was, forget that. His house was built very early. By the 1841 tax assessment records, the value of the house was $2,265. So that was one of the finer houses in Hermann, and one of the few remaining houses of the characters that I talk about today that remains to say anything about that period in time. This is on 2nd Street on the hill overlooking 1st Street and the river. It's a 2-story stone house, probably the most, well, not just probably, the most substantial stone house in Hermann. Setzer was obviously well-to-do. And here is the house today. It's covered with parging that doesn't look quite as it did in its construction around 1838 or 39. Let's go to the next. One of the fascinating things about Setzer, he checked the box in the 1840 census. He was in the 1840 census, I misspoke. He checked agriculture, but he's not your normal farmer. He has an incredible library. Fabulous library, including the Waverley novels, which was a term for the collected works of Sir Walter Scott on the right, including Ivanhoe and other classics. He also had the works of Schiller, and Schiller was a great German hero. He was a playwright. His first play, The Robbers, was an overnight success, and he became acclaimed all over Europe. In fact, he was thought to be the second greatest playwright in Europe, second to Shakespeare. He's also responsible for Woman Tell. And there is a street in Hermann, as you know, named Schiller, after the man. But an amazing list of literary items, which you would not expect. This is another case of, I think, a great partnership. Amalia Setzer carried on after Setzer's death he died in 1840. Or I believe it may have been a cholera issue, but she carried on. He left everything to her, so she was able to carry on. They had fruit lots, and they rented them out. We have to go back a ways, but in the bird's eye view, you can see the house surrounded by orchards. She continued to rent those out. She had enough money that she was able to do mortgages for people, lend money. So this is a very early, active woman who was so beloved by the community that the Wokenblatt did a really lovely obituary, sort of comparing her with Mother Teresa almost. She was, and just some little fun little items. She did have a pianoforte, and Ferdinand Palmer repaired it for her. And the cost of her coffin, I'm always interested in this, I don't know why, was $10 by Johann Quandt. So the Setzers. One other item, George Beyer, in the few letters that remain, wrote about Setzer. He didn't care for Setzer. He thought he was moving in, he was buying land where he shouldn't be. So, and for years I wondered why Frenchtown is called Frenchtown, and I really believe part of this due to Pierre Brunet, who lived on Front Street. Today, let's see. Today, that's about where the Hermann vineyards are. His house actually lasted until 1940, and there was an article in the Advertiser Courier saying that it had been demolished, and the workmen were surprised to find so many wagon-making parts and so forth. So there was real archaeology there. He was a wagon maker. He was a dyed-in-the-wool Frenchman. He didn't desire to assimilate, and in his probate account, he died in 1853 along with his wife. There's a bill for numerous things, including translation from French to the German language. What's this? Oh, and the French connection continues. He had borrowed money. This is a promissory note from Henri Chouteau, you know the Chateaus, Pierre Chateau, involved in the founding of St. Louis. So there's a real, as I said, French connection here, but this doesn't. Again, the inventory is always fascinating. In Pierre's case, it was mostly household items and tools. My favorite thing, here's the French connection again, one bear coat. So obviously he had been in touch with the fur trappers who came from town. But even more fascinating in the inventory, he was a big whiskey drinker, really big whiskey drinker. I don't know if you can see this, but on July 24th, a gallon of whiskey, the 22nd, the 24th, the 28th, the 31st. I don't know if he was just drinking this himself or having friends over, but it looks as though his life was primarily whiskey and mackerel. And then I love this invoice from Clement Smith, who took care of him in his illness. Again, this was Blackwell's car, he and his wife died at about the same time. They tended to him for 8 days and nights, and they kept the light going all night for that time. That's their bill. And here, another bill for his coffin, $5, built by Ferdinand Palmer. This is my favorite character. I just stumbled on him. I don't even remember how. Just a reference, Frederick Freilich. I don't know where he came from or when. I just know there's a probate file. And it's a fascinating one. Like Johann Setzer, he had quite a library. And what astounded me, we had a French dictionary of French synonyms, this and that, but he had a copy of the New Eloise, which is a very popular French novel, the only novel written by Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was a famous French philosopher and man of letters. It was called the New Eloise, letters of two lovers living in a small village at the foot of the Alps. So that was a pretty romantic thing to have in one's possession. He was just an interesting character. I guess we should go to the next thing. He had the most incredible wardrobe. Numerous pairs of pantaloons, which are pants, and shirts, vests, a walking cane, a fur cap, this and that, but 2 bottles of hair oil, and my favorite phonetic spelling, 1 bottle of letter O, apostrophe D, cologne. And he was obviously very, very concerned with his wardrobe. This is a bill in the probate file from Anna Rathgeb for making 1 dozen superfine shirts at $1.25 each. As we said earlier, it was about $1 a day for labor, so those were expensive shirts. He must have cut quite the figure around town, I think. Also, he had oil paintings. 2 of Hermann, bought by Julius Hunthausen, and a couple of others. I think he must have been a quintessential bachelor. He was not married. He had 3 sisters in Germany, but the only household items are a tumbler and a basket. Everything else is clothing. And very fine clothing at that. And the best part comes. Just wait. My favorite part in his wardrobe deerskin hunting shirt and leggings. And who bought the hunting shirt but Carl Straley. This is Daniel Boone. I was wondering why someone coming to Hermann would pack such a wardrobe, but certainly if you had the image of the howling wilderness and Daniel Boone, the deerskin hunting jacket and leggings would be just what you needed. And he died of cholera, and this is a rare confirmation. This was from a gentleman who attended him at night during his sickness of cholera, $5 bill. So we've come through quite a bit. We've come through people just not being able to carry on with suicides. We've had early deaths from cholera, and now we come to probably the most amazing chapter. And this will be our conclusion, and I won't go into it at great length because it is so complex, but it's the story of August Limer, Louis C. Garnier, and Charles Nesker. I would wager these names aren't known to anyone with the exception of August Limer. Limer had a hotel on the riverfront that's still there. Limer came to the U.S. in 1837. This is his ship manifest. He was 21, and he lists himself as a merchant. He left Bremen in Germany and arrived in New York. He would have quickly gone to Philadelphia because that's where his father and his brother were located. He may have already known about the excitement with the 1836 Settlement Society plans, but soon he left Philadelphia for Hermann. He got here around 1838. Don't know about Alexander, if he actually came or just sent letters, but they were both members of the Settlement Society. Limer immediately claimed his lot, which was on Lot 13 East Wharf, and that's this lot. And by 1839, actually prior to the actual recording of the deed, he had built a building on that property, and I should say the residents were required to build quickly, mostly within a year, or forfeit the property. The trustees wanted things to move forward. That he was already, he mortgaged, he started off with a promissory note to his brother Alex, and then ended up with a mortgage to Alex, which was an inkling of things not so good to come. That was in 1839. Let's go to the next one. By 1840 or earlier, he had gotten involved in huge enterprise. Now, think back to George Beyer, who didn't care for Mr. Setzer. He really didn't care for Limer. He thought he was a speculator. Something to be watched. Well, it turns out he was a speculator. He somehow got himself involved with Louis C. Garnier and Charles Nesker, who already had a company. But Limer got on board, put his name first, and the three of them came up with a plan for a mercantile operation, distillery, mill, thank you, and livestock operation. And that's talking about a lot of money that early. I mean, I can see that they thought, well, that would be just what Hermann needs. You know, they need goods, they need drink. You know, again, whiskey. But they got most of their merchandise on credit, and then they allowed credit to customers, and then the whole thing apparently just collapsed. They had everything from school items to clothing to kitchen items to household needs like latches and doorknobs, spices, sugar bowls, and then they had the different kinds of, they had brandy and gin and brandy, some of which was actually, it was sent on to St. Louis and was in stock in St. Louis stores apparently. They bought a very expensive, for the time, brass steam engine. Bought that in St. Louis from Gady, Coons, and Glaspie, again on credit. And didn't work. Garnier pretty much left town. Charles Messer is the sad part of the equation. He was actually a member of the Hermann Board of Trustees at the time. He was just devastated by the failure. He was staying in the boarding house of Catherine Beyer, and this is interesting, the widow of George Beyer. And he slit his wrists and bled to death. So there's left Longman. And he, the company, it was before bankruptcy laws, so the firm was just declared insolvent, and Lymer was held responsible for most of that cost. And to his rescue came Johann Setzer, who bought back his house and land on Lot 13 East Wharf, or things could have been even worse. But that's just the beginning of August Lymer. And I hope you've enjoyed learning a little bit about some characters who were below the radar in Hermann, and you'll have to come back again for the next installment. Thank you so much. If there are any questions, I'm happy to entertain them. Oh.
I read where you were going to discuss the French tractor trade that was there with the Germans.
I don't believe there really was.
What's the question?
Were there fur trappers here when the Germans landed? I haven't found any evidence to suggest that. I think they may have passed through. They probably did. The Choteaus owned land just east of Hermann. I'm sure that Pierre Brunet had contact with him. That's why he had his bear coat and things, but I don't believe they were actually, they didn't have land that was recorded in the deed book. Yes, there were a few Anglo-American settlers who took pity on them and she was Phillips. No, I don't. I think there's just a lot of folklore about this. French would have passed through, but they didn't have land here in the Hermann area that's found in the deed books. I think they certainly would have come through. The bear coat, fur cap had to come from somewhere, but I think that's somewhere in there. There's a lot of, I think, mythology about Polly Phillips.
But she was here.
She was here. Yeah. She was one of the Willis Hensley and Polly Phillips and
Thomas Rohr.
Thomas Rohr were here when the Germans the first intrepid band of 17 arrived, they had to help them. There was something, so they were very kind in their willingness to take them in until they could get on their feet and get buildings set up. Thanks for the question. Jim?
So you had trouble finding the bear and beer guy. So Germans are famous for beer, and yet there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of beer here. Was there a lot of beer here originally?
There
It fell by the wayside, or what?
No, there was. That's another article. I didn't have a hard time finding out that he was a brewer. It's just I didn't know where and what. I think he must have made it in small batches for his customers. He's not found in the paper as doing anything other than running the Luisenberg establishment.
I mean, was beer brewing fairly big here early on, and then
It
it
was.
sort of petered out?
It was very big, and it petered out with Prohibition. There were several small brewers, one really big one, the Crop Brewery, which is the building that still stands. It's now the Brennerhoff Winery. And if you ever have a chance to go there, it's a fabulous, the cellars there are absolutely fabulous. Before Crop, Jacob Strobel, another one of my suicides, really had a hard time and ended up just ending it all because his beer wasn't good and he was getting a lot of competition from St. Louis. A lot of beer.
There was Hermann Brewery too. A bottle.
Oh, you have a bottle? Oh, I haven't found any bottles, so I'd love to see that. All sorts of liquor consumed. At one point in time, before Prohibition, even Stonehill Winery was offering St. Louis beers. And during the early 20th century, brewers like J.M. Danzer, who took over the Crop Brewery, were pleading in the paper for people to support local brews because the St. Louis products were so much sought after. In fact, there are a couple of St. Louis brewers that established little boutique, pre-boutique, but little footholds in them. The Columbia Brewery and
Was the original land bought from private people, or was it from the U.S. government?
it was a combination. Quite a bit from so-called Congress land, and then a bit from individuals. And they had to pay more for the land bought from individuals. The Congress land was pretty cheap. I'm trying to think. For the Congress land, but $15 maybe from a private individual. So, Jim?
This is a little bit outside of where you were going, but do you have any idea how suicide rates in Herman compared to other settlements? You hear about suicides on the prairie, the loneliness.
That's something I really would like to look into. I mean, Herman was a fairly small town, and yet there were several major ones by all. Jacob Morlock was a gunsmith and ran a B&B called the Herman House. And he shot himself. Jacob Strobel Brewery, another one who just walked into the river. Adam Batesel hung himself. I mean, it's just, I think my point about it was hard. And if you were looking at this from Mars or something, why did this happen? How did it succeed? And it's just that the people were determined somehow to keep on going, and became a fabulous success until Prohibition, and then there was a downtime, and now it's thriving again. But just hard work, blood, sweat, and tears, and some people couldn't take it, others just kept on trying like lions. He is a classic example of someone who lost everything and then bounced back again to, and we didn't really talk about that, but to have a thriving hotel business along the wharf. Well, thank you for your questions. If you have any others, just let me know. I don't consider myself an expert at all. There are people here who know well more than I, but I'm a great researcher, so I'm able to come up with these little pockets of things, so I'll keep at it.
I hope we can convince her to do another.
I know beer must have been popular at one time because even on my paper route, I sampled a lot of home brew. Made in basements of many homes. I'd like to thank Bonnie Eichelman. She made it upstairs. She was downstairs when you guys came in. I thank the Missouri Bank for allowing us to use their facilities today.